it's so nice to be, it's amazing really to be in such a loving environment. And from the time I got off the airplane, people were coming up and saying, oh, I love you. And I thought, wow, I should have come earlier. Thank you. But it's so great. I feel like, you know, I teach so much loving kindness meditation, and probably tomorrow will be really devoted to that. I feel like I spend so much of my time kind of defending love, like it's really okay. It's not being weak and sort of sentimental and giving in, and it's really a force, it's really a strength. And I suddenly thought, I may not have to do that here. I might have very little to say. We can practice, though. But it really does feel that way. It's quite special. And I just said to Raghu, I was kind of amused at the topic of this workshop, of this retreat, because one year, Raghu wanted to call the retreat Compassion. And I said, how about compassion in times of adversity? And then, which he did, he went along with, and then all these things, little things, but annoying things happened for people, like so many planes were late or canceled, and then Raghu said, you had to say adversity, right? Like, if you hadn't said it, it would have been smooth sailing. So clearly that one was all my fault. So if you have a negative emotion while you're here, it's his fault. And maybe, you know, like I was saying last night, it would be kind of healthy even to get away from the word negative, although that is the common word. People say destructive emotion, afflictive emotion, negative emotion. And it's not a question of what we feel and what we don't feel. You know, it's certainly not a question of trying to lay this nice little veneer on top of what might be seething, conflicted feelings and very painful feelings at all. It's really all, the question of our freedom or our suffering is really a question of how we relate to those emotions. We feel what we feel. And I think there's an integrity in honoring that and not pretending otherwise, ever. But emotions, as a body of experience, tend to often drive us to action. And that's another matter. You know, that's like the first gap we're looking for between the feeling and the action it's propelling us to take. Because wouldn't you like to know, for example, that you're kind of angry before you press send on your email? It's not to say you're not going to write something. It's not to say you're even never going to decide to send that very email. But wouldn't you like a moment, like, just to consider, maybe I've lost perspective. Maybe I need to wait a bit. Maybe there's another way of saying this that is more likely to get me what I want. So we feel what we feel, but before it propels us into action, we want to have a measure of mindfulness, which means space. We just want some space. And then we decide. And this brings me back to what I was talking about last night, and Lucy, my inner critic. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard me talk about this cartoon. A friend of ours had rented a house for several of us to do retreat in. And when I went into the bedroom that had been set aside for me, I saw that someone had left a cartoon from the Peanuts comic strip on the desk. And in the first frame of the cartoon, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, you know, Charlie Brown, what your problem with you is that you're you. And then in the second frame of the cartoon, poor Charlie Brown says, well, what in the world can I do about that? And then in the third and final frame, Lucy says, I don't pretend to be able to give advice, I merely point out the problem. And somehow, whenever I was doing walking meditation by that desk, my eye would fall right on that line. The problem with you is that you're you, right? Like if you really knew who you were, it would be a sad story. Because that Lucy dominant voice had been so prominent, so dominant in my earlier life. And I've also had, by the time I saw the cartoon, had spent many years practicing in different schools of mindfulness, different approaches to mindfulness, including one that is this technique called mental noting, which basically means that if the word comes easily, you place a label on your predominant experience. So we're going to practice a little bit of that in a few minutes. So maybe with the breath, as well as feeling the sensations of the breath, you're quietly, mentally noting in, out, in, out. And then if a very strong emotion comes up and the word comes easily, you might note, joy, joy, anger, anger, in, out. So I had spent a long, long time doing that particular technique. So I felt like seeing the cartoon gave me a couple of new mental notes. One was, hi, Lucy. So basically what happened was, this is what actually happened, something great happened for me very soon after seeing the cartoon, and my very next thought was, it's never going to happen again. And I said, hi, Lucy. And the other form of the noting was actually my favorite, and that was, chill out, Lucy. Chill out. Now this is different from, you're right, Lucy. You're always right. And it's also different from, I cannot believe Lucy is still here. I have been meditating for, now it's like 45 years, and Lucy is still coming up. I spent all that money in therapy just last year, and like, Lucy's still here. It's like, oh my God, I'm the worst, right? Those are the two extremes I was talking about last night. Diving into it, kind of losing a sense of who we actually are, so that Lucy takes over, makes our choices for us, holds us back. Or the other extreme of just like so disliking our experience that we are in a struggle, that we will always lose. This shouldn't have happened. Well, it happened, all right. And so we talk about mindfulness as the place in the middle. It's like slicing in between those two reactions. And that's what really matters within this kind of frame of understanding. It's sort of reflective of this very beautiful image from the Buddha where he said, the mind, that means your mind and my mind, the mind is naturally radiant and pure. The mind is shining. It's because of visiting forces that we suffer. The mind is naturally radiant and pure. The mind is shining. It's because of visiting forces that we suffer. Visiting forces like greed. We get overcome by greed. Hatred, fear, jealousy, whatever it might be. There are at least two really profound elements of that statement. It's kind of a visionary statement of the Buddhist. One is these forces are just visiting. They're born out of conditions. They're not who actually lives here. They're adventitious. They're not innate to our being. They're not inherent to our being. They come and they go. They may come a lot. They may visit nearly incessantly, but they're still just visiting. And the other thing is, the Buddha said, is because of visiting forces that we suffer. He didn't say it's because of visiting forces that we're awful, awful people. Or just like wretched or, dreadful. He said it's because of visiting forces that we suffer. So think about that. So maybe, I love that image. From the first time I heard it, I extrapolated it right away to the sense of myself sitting at home happily, minding my own business, and hearing a knock at the door. And going to open up the door, and there's, greed or hatred or fear. And And one temptation, which can be very strong, is to fling open the door, forget who actually lives there, say, welcome home, it's all yours. I'll just cower in this little corner over here, you know, or maybe stand outside. It's yours. And the other temptation is to be so ashamed and so upset and so freaked out that that particular visitor has come, that we desperately try to shove the door closed, and only to find that that visitor then comes in the window or down the chimney or something. They make their presence known. And so I've often thought of kind of the skill of mindfulness, learning the skill of mindfulness is learning what you do when you open that door. And it happens to be an unwelcome visitor. Can you meet that moment, that experience with presence, with balance, with compassion, with a kind of tenderness, like have a cup of tea, Lucy? You just sit there, make yourself comfortable. Don't run up and down, you know, just like, calm down, it's okay. It's really okay, Lucy. And that is a skill, you know, it's not maybe something many of us perhaps grew up having, but it's a skill that we can develop. It needs Lucy to come to develop the skill. So all is not lost if you hear lots of knocks, you know, and there tend to be more or less a great preponderance of unwelcome visitors. That's how we learn the skill. And it's got all those elements. When we say mindfulness, it means presence and balance and openness and recognition. Not giving in, not complacency, not stupidity. You know, one of my concerns about mindfulness as a term, and we'll go into this in another ways tomorrow with loving kindness and compassion, but one of my concerns is that the ways it's defined, which are all accurate, also for us can seem so kind of sleepy. You know, like mindfulness means not judging your experience, it's true. Mindfulness means accepting things the way that they are, that's also true. But it often implies to us we're just kind of inert, right? Acceptance is a tough word to understand. The idea of not judging doesn't mean you lose all common sense, but it can seem that way. So we're going to sit in just a couple of seconds, and very often when we do the mindfulness instructions, we start by listening to sound, and then we make our way over to feeling the breath as a kind of anchor for our attention. So I was teaching somewhere, and I started, you know, just saying, no, let's sit, and we'll begin by listening to sound. And immediately somebody raised their hand and said, well, what if it's the sound of the smoke alarm going off? Should I sit here mindfully knowing the smoke alarm is going off, or should I get up? And I said, I'd get up. No, but I honestly really understood where the question was coming from, because doesn't it sound that way? To accept things the way that they are. I hear sound. Be with it without judging. It's just a sound, like any sound. Listen, equal. But it doesn't mean that. You know, mindfulness is a very vibrant, alive, connected state. It's because we're not immediately reacting, holding on or pushing away, that we have the chance to see more deeply into any situation. There's more insight, there's more wisdom, and so on. Some experiences are harder than others, of course. And, you know, very old voices like perhaps Lucy can be very difficult, but it's all the same skill, right? We just keep applying that presence, that way of seeing, the ability to recognize, oh, this is what's happening right now, without holding on or pushing away, no matter what's coming up. Okay, you want to stretch or just take a short break? Get comfortable. Okay, so I'm sure many of you are really familiar with meditation practice. You have your own way of practicing. This is a very foundational kind of technique. I like it. I like even 45 years later going back to it. This was the first instruction I ever got, which was sit and feel your breath. I like it for a number of reasons. It's simple, it's direct, it's not as easy as it sounds, which is always good to be reminded of. And it's like a fractal. It contains all the principles of an entire path, right? We're going to gather some of our perhaps more scattered, distracted energy and rest and settle. It doesn't have to be the breath, of course. I like, at least at times, using the breath because, as one of my early teachers said, you don't have to believe anything in order to feel your breath. And, it's completely open and available to anybody who's breathing. And as one teacher said, I always felt very charmingly, he said, the breath is very portable. Right? So if you spend 10 minutes a day in a formal, dedicated practice, using the breath as the vehicle for returning to the moment, returning to yourself, and then you're at work, and it's crazy. You don't have to open up the closet door and pull out all this equipment, and start burning incense and sit down cross-legged and close your eyes and look weird, right? You're using your breath. You're just take a breath. And in returning to yourself and returning to the moment in that way, you also find you return to your values, you return to your priorities, what you really care about. So it's a tremendous tool. The word is rest. Some people feel, whether it's a mantra or the breath or whatever, if they grab hold, get a death grip on that object, their minds won't wander, and really they'll wander more. It's rest. The Buddha put it, rest your attention lightly, the way a butterfly will rest upon a flower. Okay, so the breath, in this case, is what's called our primary object. We rest our attention. Other things will arise, no doubt. Glorious, beautiful experiences, some difficult, unwelcome experiences, and maybe a lot of boredom in between and around. But we see if we can recognize simply, oh, this is what's happening right now. Maybe with a word. Joy. Pain. If the word comes easily. And then see if you can let go, bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. And there may be many, many times when you're just gone. You don't have a clue, right? Swept up in lots of thought or fantasy or memory or whatever, or you fall asleep. And then comes the magic moment where you sort of emerge oh, it's been quite some time since I last felt a breath. That's considered the really significant moment in the practice, because that's the moment we have the chance to be really different. So instead of judging yourself and blaming yourself and calling yourself a failure and ranting, see if you can let go gently. It's what one of my teachers called exercising the letting go muscle. See if you can let go gently. And with heartfulness, with kindness toward yourself, return your attention to the feeling of the breath. That's like the major muscle movement of the practice. It's letting go and beginning again. And letting go and starting over. And letting go and starting over. And that's why it's like a fractal, right? There's an entire path of liberation right there. And we bring it becomes a life skill. We bring it to work, we bring it to the commute. Not in a strained way, oh God, I spent 5 days, what did I learn? I didn't learn anything. Well, I better act like I learned something. It's not like that. It's we shift. We've built up a skill. And so here we are in some difficult circumstance, and okay, we're going to let go and start over. Or I did make a mistake, and I have lessons learned, perhaps, but it's not going to be that helpful to spend the next year and a half just blaming myself for that mistake. That's why we call meditation a resilience practice. Let me learn how to start over. And that's what we're really doing, okay? So see if you can sit comfortably. They say right away there's some element of balance reflected in our posture. You want to have some energy in your body, so that means have your back straight, but not like so much energy. You're really stiff and uptight. You also just want to be relaxed and at ease. But not like so at ease that your waist slumped over. So see if you can feel your way into what it feels like to you to be a balanced posture. And you can close your eyes or not. Some of you are accustomed to practicing one way or another, and it's fine. If your eyes are open, they could also be like a little bit open. You could find a spot to rest your gaze, let it go. And if you get really sleepy in the course of the sitting, your eyes are closed, you can open them up and just continue on. And we'll start by listening to sound. Sound in my voice, other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing our experience to come and go. Of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others. But we don't have to chase after them to hold on or push away. Just let them come, let them go. It's like the sounds just wash through you. You bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. Bring your attention to your hands. And see if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level, like of fingers, to the world of direct sensation. Picking up pulsing, throbbing, pressure, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. In this system, it's just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to try to make it deeper or different. See if you can find the place where your breath is clearest for you or strongest for you. Maybe that's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. You can find that spot, bring your attention there, and rest. See if you can feel one breath. without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And if you like, you can use a quiet mental notation like in, out, to help support the awareness of the breath, but very quiet, so your attention is really going to feeling the breath, one breath at a time. And if sounds or images or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. But if they are strong and you get pulled away, swept up in thought or fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. You say the most important moment is the next moment after you've been gone. However long it's been, doesn't matter. You realize you've been disconnected, you've been distracted, you've been somewhere else. See if you can gently let go. And with some kindness towards yourself, return your attention to the feeling of the breath. If you have to do that a few billion times in the next few minutes, that's totally okay. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you. It was a nice interval. I'm going to just say a little bit more, and then we'll have time for just questions, discussions. Do you have a microphone that goes around? Okay, so I just want to go back for a moment to the example I gave about the gap we want is between what we feel and how we act. Because once, many years ago, I read an article in the New York Times about mindfulness before the onslaught, interest in mindfulness. And this was about a very early program. Now there are many more, but it was a very early pilot program bringing mindfulness into the classroom. And it was a 4th grade classroom in Oakland, California. And I thought it was a tremendous article, and there were 2 quotations in it I especially liked. One was they asked something of the program of one of the researchers, and he said, all day long we tell kids to pay attention, but we never teach them how. And then they asked one of the kids, right, so he's in 4th grade, he's 9 or 10 years old. They said to him, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? And he said, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means. And I thought that is a great definition of mindfulness, actually. It's really great. Because what does it imply? It implies knowing you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry. Not after it's escalated, not after you've pressed send, not after you've hit someone in the mouth. But as that feeling is beginning, you're so much more in touch with yourself, you can feel it begin. And it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger, like being able to recognize, like, hi Lucy, right? Like, oh, this is anger. Because if we fall into it, if it takes over, if we lose that sense of I live here, you're a visitor, then we'll probably hit a lot of people in the mouth, right? Because life can be really frustrating. But at the same time, if we hate what we're feeling and we fear it and we're trying to deny it and we're trying to repress it, and we get tighter and tighter and tighter, and then we explode. It just doesn't work. So we're always looking for that middle place that can say, this is anger. And in that creates a kind of space. It doesn't mean your feeling is totally invalid. It means that you're going to have some space in which to consider your action. Maybe you think, hit someone in the mouth last week. It didn't work out that well, Maybe I'll try this, or whatever it is. So I just love that definition. Mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. And then I'll just say, sort of echoing Krishnadas a little bit from last night, it's a practice. Our friend Bob Thurman doesn't like it when we use the word practice all the time. He keeps saying, when's the performance, Like practices, you're just kind of getting ready, but it's not practice in that sense. It's a skills training. Unless you are supremely lucky and you can do it automatically, it takes practice, and practice, and practice, and practice. It really works. But unfortunately for us, it doesn't work by admiring it from afar, or thinking it would be a great thing. One of the books I wrote was called Real Happiness, and it's sort of a guide to starting or renewing a meditation practice. And when I was on tour with that book, there were countless people who came up to me asking me to sign the book, saying something like, I'm buying your book for my cousin. They really need it. I could never do it, but they really need it. And I was happy for me and happy for the cousin, but what's this I could never do it thing, It's like we have to see for ourselves, is this worth pursuing? It's like, it's a live experiment. It doesn't happen from thinking about it or, admiring somebody else. It's really very vital. It's very vibrant. And that is practice. So I had a teacher, a very kind of revered Tibetan teacher, who basically said the most important moment of your practice, whatever kind of practice it is, the most important moment of your practice is the moment you sit down to do it. Because in that moment you're saying something like, I don't want to be left out, I want to see what this means for me, and that's not selfish. That's absolutely right. You're saying something about belief in change, about caring about yourself, being open to possibility. That's the moment. In some sittings, let's say it's a sitting, it doesn't have to be a sitting, but we'll call it a sitting, feel one way and others feel another way, but that's the moment. That's really most essential. And so we talk about try to have a daily practice. Doesn't do 6 hours a day. Even neuroscience is saying like 20 minutes a day. Because I'm so kind of identified in the eyes of the world with loving kindness practice. I had a scientist say to me recently that the latest studies showed that 9 minutes of mindfulness practice a day and only 7 minutes of loving kindness practice a day would change your brain. And I never thought it was necessarily that helpful to go for the bare minimum, but it's like, it seems to be it's the everydayness of it, taking it away from the abstract, making it real, putting it into practice. That's what seems to be the most transformative element. And on top of that, so we have maybe a regular practice, even if it's like 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day. On top of that, we have what we call sometimes short moments many times. Even here, we can be so distracted. And just stop for a moment. We had lunch, I arrived just yesterday, and had lunch with Ramdas and a whole group of people sitting at a table, and we were getting kind of frenzied about the state of the world or something, and every once in a while Ramdas would say, look at the ocean. I go, all right. Ocean out there. Look at that. Every short moments, many times, when you drink, and it wouldn't take long to drink this cup of chai, because it's really a small cup. Here, because of the incredible beauty and the joy of being together and so on, we may not be quite as into multitasking as we normally are, but even here, right? How often do you just drink the cup of chai and not think it? As soon as I finish the chai, I'm going to bid in that auction. You should bid in the auction, but you don't have to be consumed by that thought as you're drinking the cup of chai. Because then you're going to need another cup because you wouldn't have tasted it. Right? So, short moments many times. Just take a moment, look at the ocean, take a breath. Feel the warmth of the cup in your hand. Look at who you're talking to, whatever it is. It's a very beautiful way of practicing. So, I'd love to hear from you if you have any comments or questions, anything you'd like to talk about before we end this session and move on. You have the microphone? He's the man whose attention you have to grab, because I can't see. These lights are right in my eye.
Hello there. Is that on? Yes. I was struck by the fact that you said meditation prepares us for resistance.
I said resilience.
Resilience, I mean. But, yes.
Could prepare us for resistance, too.
Right.
Did I say resistance?
No. So yeah. I will look at the ocean and remember.
It could prepare us for resistance, if you're into resistance, which is the word these days for many people.
It's obviously in my mind. But I wondered if you'd expand on that a little bit.
Resilience or resistance?
Either one.
Okay. Well, resilience in the sense of, I think it takes some self-knowledge, some introspection to see how we actually learn. Any one of us, like how do I learn something? How do I make a change in my life? How do I make progress in something? I also believe at this stage of my life that nothing in life is a straight shot, right? We go forward, we fall down. We have to get up or let others help us up, we go forward again. Or we make a mistake and we have to regroup and begin again. Or, you know, we have this huge, tremendous aspiration and we lose sight of it. We have to start over. That's how life is. So how do we learn, how do we accomplish something given that that's how things are? So many people have discovered, and I think the science is also confirming this, that something like self-compassion is the most effective, most efficient way to change a habit, to make a difference. Because we don't tend to believe that. I mean, I've taught a million places where I said something about let go and begin again, and somebody has raised their hand and said that's just laziness. You know, being kind to myself is the same as being lazy. But what I'm told anyway is that studies show that, performance studies of all kinds show that a kind of harsh, intense, stressful environment will spike our performance, but briefly, and then we crash. That if you really want to make a sustained difference in your life, it's through the ability to begin again, to have more kindness to yourself, to regroup. And because that's the very act we're doing again and again and again in the meditation, that's why I say it's a resilience training. I think it's also a resistance training because, you know, and this will come up again tomorrow, not resistance in the sense of being stubborn, you know, but in the sense of fighting for what you believe in, and you know, finding sources of strength that are different maybe, and because again, you know, there's so much around meditation, mindfulness, certainly compassion or love that implies it's being acquiescent, you know, and sweet, and too nice, and it's really not that way. You know, all of those ways of being are, first of all, they are skills training, and they're also a way of connecting to something bigger, which we need to fuel us because nothing is a straight shot, right? It's not like you say, oh good, I won. You know, now I've always in that seat. It's not true. So I think it's a tremendous source of strength.
Hi, Sharon. You mentioned yesterday you got all frazzled about the state of the world. I don't think I've ever felt so much anxiety about what's going on and how many people are getting hurt. Can you speak about how to go out and practice activism without agitation and anger?
Oh, it's hard, and it seems to me to be essential because it is such a difficult time for so many people. Whatever you believe in, you know, whatever you might be passionate about. Because I think if I look at something like the civil rights movement in this country, it feels to me to have been a spiritual movement. I was a little young I was not young, but I was a little too young to be marching, for example, you know. But as I look now, back then, I look at, you know, freedom riders, people going, my particular passion is voting, which we can go into if you like. Urging people to vote, helping people to vote, and things like that. And so that's not always popular. I've gotten a lot of feedback about that. You know, I look at the films of the Freedom Riders going out to help people register to vote in the South, and being beaten. And before they go out, they get down on their knees and pray. And then after they've been beaten in the hospital, they're like shining, you know, and saying, we practice nonviolence. This is what we do. And I think the other thing we learn from history that really intrigues me is that I think we look back at whatever movement, you know, in whatever direction that inspires us. Like I would look back at the Civil Rights Movement and I have a certain feeling like, wow, they were so brave doing what they were doing. But I almost have the assurance of time that, oh, they knew it was going to work. And then I realized they didn't even know it was going to work. You know, they just went and did it. And I realized in the moment, you don't know that it's going to work. We never do. But sometimes we're moved to do things. And I think, and it doesn't have to be social movement, it doesn't have to be political action, that need to connect to something bigger in order to be in the presence of suffering and not just like go to bed, you know. We all need that. I mean, many years ago, and again, this will come up more tomorrow when we talk about compassion. It was National or International Nurses Week, and I was invited to Walter Reed Army Hospital before they moved to the new facility, the old facility, where, you know, very badly injured soldiers were going, and to give a talk to the nurses. And I got there early, and a friend of mine was a nurse there, so she arranged this tour for me of a little part of one of the wards, and, you know, needless to say, it was extremely intense. Perhaps some of you have been there, or that kind of place, in one capacity or another, between the people who were injured and their families. It was just like so intense. And at the end of the tour, my friend, who's a nurse there, turned around and said to me, you know, the nurses who can stay here, and that means the nurses who can continue to serve here, the nurses who can stay here are not the ones who get lost in sorrow. The nurses who can stay here are the ones who can connect to the resiliency of the human spirit. And in that moment, I kind of thought, oh, that's compassion. You know, we tend to think of compassion as like going down with the ship, you know? Like feeling so bad. But if we feel that bad, we don't have the energy to try to make a difference in a sustained way. So we've got to always look at those ways of connecting.
Is insight meditation the same as shamatha meditation?
Not exactly, although they're very connected. And it's different, it's slightly different in different Buddhist traditions. Samatha means concentration, and that is basically more or less what I was urging you to do. You know, choosing a single object, could be the breath, could be a sound, could be a word, could be an image. Settling your attention on it and just continually coming back and coming back and coming back. So that is really about gathering our, generally speaking, kind of scattered energy, getting more concentrated, having that energy return to us, which is tremendously empowering and enlivening, and stabilizing our attention so we don't feel we're kind of all over the place. And so this is my tradition, and then we take that ability to be present and we broaden the sphere of what we're looking at. So it's not just the breath. If you got a significant knee pain, for example, and it wasn't something you could just sort of let go and come back to the breath with, you know, it's pretty strong, you'd stay with the pain. And you'd apply those same principles of, you know, presence and balance and interest and all of that to the pain. That becomes your new object of meditation. And because we're looking at our emotional world, we're looking at our physical world, the goal is not just to stabilize attention, but to kind of unclutter it so that, if you're looking at, let's say, anger, and you're not freaked out about it, and you're not pushing it away, and you're also not, plotting revenge, but you're looking at, like, what is anger? Maybe one level of insight that then comes is, you see, oh, look at how much sadness is in my anger, or look at that feeling of helplessness that's in my anger, or look at, how much fear is in this anger. And you keep looking, and then you see, look at how the anger is changing. It appeared, it felt so solid and forever, and who I really was, but look at that, within itself. It's so coming and going. It's kind of almost transparent. It's insubstantial. So if you asked me, for example, if you stopped me on my way in here and said, would you rather have a deep insight into the nature of change, looking at bliss or looking at anger? I'd say bliss. But from the point of view of insight, meditation doesn't matter. Because the goal is that insight into change, which we can find anywhere. So they're very connected, but they're considered different.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This neighborhood is very wakeful. What's going on over there?
So we were in the shuttle, heading from the airport.
We were
sitting in the seat together. And my version of Lucy came up at some point, and I heard her say, would you just shut up? You're just giddy and babbling, and everybody else in this whole bus is so zen, and you're just sitting there. And so when you were talking about Lucy last night, my question to you would be, and so she stayed with me for a while after that. You should have just sat there and looked like you were calm and, like you belong here, right? So this is the question, how does sitting and having tea with Lucy, your Lucy, look and sound to you? So that I need it. Once I recognize, oh, she's here and she's angry with me, how would that dialogue look with your Lucy?
Well, I think it's always changing. The reason that we sometimes say if you have a prevalent voice that's like a critical voice that gets to be kind of recognizable, sometimes we say give it a name, give it a persona. Some people give it a wardrobe, like judges' robes or something. I apologize to any judges that are in the room.
I actually call her Sister Salvador. So.
Okay. Because that just gives us a little bit of space, instead of being so down on ourselves. It's like, oh, there's someone else in the room, And usually we're nicer to other people than we are to ourselves. So that's the first thing. And then it just depends, as long as it's in that middle range, neither saying, you're right, Lucy, you're always right, why don't you ever shut up? And then as long as it's not, I can't believe it, like I was just in India for 6 months and I'm just as bad as I ever was.
Came up.
You were fine, but since you brought it up, I'll riff on what you said. But in that place in the middle, maybe that voice is saying something constructive, actually, or interesting. But in the midst of a whole lot else, or maybe it's way too sweeping a generalization. It's usually a sign that it's not that helpful. You're always like, which is just not true. There may, a lot of it depends on where in that moment our particular imbalance tends to lie. If it lies on the side of being ashamed and freaked out that that voice is still there, then maybe our effort is to be a little more welcoming. Give her 2 cups of chai. Say, hey, I understand you're here. Let's just hang out. Whereas if your tendency is to get swept up and have her take over and you know, for you to act because of that voice a lot and suffer as a result, then maybe your effort is to get a little more space. You know, like, you just sit there quietly, you're gonna be okay, and I'm gonna go do my thing. Something like that. So, you know, that place where we're out of balance is the place where we work to come into more balance, but not in a, like an overly strategic way. Like if you sat in meditation and you were always thinking, am I too welcoming of Lucy? Am I too harsh? It would just drive you crazy, you know? But as you keep practicing, there's a kind of intuitive knowing, like, whoa, look at that. And it's always it's kind of a representation of, in almost the mechanics of meditation, where we talk about deepening calm and tranquility and peace and letting go, and also strengthening energy and alertness and wakefulness and interest. You know, we're always working with creating balance.
So I know, and most of us know, meditation is really great for us, and we have that intention in the morning that we're going right to it, and then, you know, well, maybe I'll meditate while I eat the coffee. Maybe I'll meditate in the shower, and then pretty soon it's 10 o'clock and it's gone. And then, oh, okay, we'll start tomorrow. Can you speak a little bit to closing that gap?
Yeah. That's one of the reasons that, and it is hard, you know, I mean, I think we need to acknowledge that, because on the face of it, it doesn't make sense. Why is this so hard? You know, like, nobody's saying you have to do this 18 hours a day, you know, but it's quite hard. That's one of the reasons what you described is one of the reasons why I'm kind of a big fan of like formal dedicated meditation. I know a lot of people say, you know, I'm getting it done while I'm washing dishes, and I'm getting it done while I'm commuting, and I think that is great to add that, but I think the reality for most of us is going to be more like what you're describing. And as one person said to me, I was teaching in New York, and said to me, kind of uncharmingly, they said, a lot of younger meditation teachers than you say, you don't really have to have a formal practice. You can meditate whatever you're doing, and that would be enough. And I said, I think theoretically that's true. And for most of us, it's going to remain really theoretical, because we're just not going to do it that way. So, and I'm also the kind of person that I feel that I'm served a lot by structure. You know, not imprisoning structure, but having a structure. I'm going to make a commitment. I'm going to sit every day for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Or sit means formal practice. I mean walking, whatever it is. But that's what I'm doing. It might be chanting, whatever your practice is. You know, that I'm just going to do it every day. And then I do it every day. First of all, it's not a lifetime commitment. That's easier. It's not an endless commitment. I'm not saying you have to do it first thing in the morning. My friend Joseph Goldstein took a resolve once. He said that he was not going to go to sleep at night until he had at least gotten into the meditation posture. So that's a 30-second commitment. And of course, that's the hardest 30 seconds of all, right? To actually stop whatever you're doing. And he said sometimes it was the very last thing at night. He'd forget all day, or he was busy, and then he was about to go to sleep and said, wait a minute, let me just... And then people set up, you know, I have a fair number of social structures. I have one group, it's 5 people. It began when one of these people said if he wakes up in the morning and he turns right, he's at his desk. If he turns left, he's at his meditation cushion. And so the other 4 of us formed this sort of support group originally for him. And every day when we've practiced, we email the other 4, and the subject line is always turn left. And then if you want, you add something. Turn left, Maui, it's very humid here. I can explain that joke too. Turn left, on my way to Syracuse. Turn left, it was a really sleepy sit. If you don't have to, because the important thing is the subject line. And it's been like 5 years now or something, and it's tremendously helpful. Find a buddy here. You know, and you go through, because it's human community, you know, it's like you go through everything. But as a structure, it's really supportive. So for example, by the time we started, I'd had a daily practice for years. So I was always the first one to write. And then I get really paranoid. They think I'm showing off. They think I'm like this goody-goody. So I'd wait like 7 hours after I sat before I wrote, or you're always the last one you notice, you know. So then I had a student actually who, I couldn't bring him into that group, but this enormous cup. Where'd you get that? I just happened to notice. I just didn't know they existed here. Did you bring it from somewhere else? It's from breakfast, okay. I didn't make it to breakfast. Anyway, I have a student who asked me if I would separately help him, you know, kind of kickstart practice, and he didn't want to, I couldn't bring him into the group anyway, but he didn't want to email, he wanted a text, so I thought, okay, I mean, there's no reason I can't get 2 bangs for the buck, like it's the same sitting, you know, I just have to communicate it twice. But then he was very funny. He, somehow, initially, he thought, I guess he thought, the goal was to be the first one to sit. So like 4 in the morning, you know, I'd hear my phone. What? Because I'm not a morning person, and he is. And I finally had to say, no, the idea is not to be the first one. The idea is to do it all. Like, but in whatever form. You know, we find social structures, and it's a beautiful sense of community. Look at you. Is somebody all, do you have a question? Yes. Why don't we take you then, you know? Okay.
So I'm interested in your comment about if you have pain, meditate on the pain. How do you not have the pain take over your whole existence doing that?
That's the training. No, it's true. There are a few things. One is we usually go back and forth between, well, the first step we do with anything that is difficult, and really anything, but certainly with things that are difficult, we say we look for the add-ons. So for example, here's another Joseph story. Joseph and I were teaching somewhere, and we were just like in the kitchen having a cup of tea. And someone came into the kitchen in some distress. He said to Joseph, I just had this really terrible experience. And Joseph said, well, what happened? And he said, I felt all this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am, and how I always have been and I always will be. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he said, yes, and I've never been able to get close to people, and it's never going to change. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And it was really interesting for me, like watching them go back and forth and back and forth. And finally Joseph said something like, why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like painful enough to feel all that tension in your jaw, but suddenly you're adding, and I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. So the first thing we say is look for the add-ons. Right? That's one of the gifts of mindfulness. We can distinguish between what's actually happening, pleasant or painful or neutral, whatever it might be, and what we're adding on to it. Because of fear, because of future projection, because of old habit, whatever it might be. And what we're working to relinquish is the add-on, which brings us back to the actual experience. Okay, so now you're back with the physical pain. We want to, if we see this as monolithic entity, it is that much more unbearable. If we can see it as a moment of freezing, a moment of pressure, a moment of heat, then we begin to see it's an alive system. And even with that, you don't want to stay with the pain for too long. We move from the pain to something that's easier to be with, like the breath or listening to sound. and then back, you know, so there's ways, it's like a training. One of my friends who had a very severe chronic pain condition said to me at one point, I found this space within the pain. It doesn't mean that it goes away necessarily, it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, but we don't need sort of pain plus, you know? In fact, they did a really interesting experiment at University of Wisconsin at Madison in Richie Davidson's lab, where he studies a lot of meditation, and somehow they got approval to administer some pain, and all these people were in fMRI machines to begin with, and there was a group of complete non-meditators, and then there was a group of people who had done like 8 weeks of meditation training. And what they found was that the meditators and the non-meditators had the same reaction to the pain, because we're human beings and pain hurts. But as soon as the pain was withdrawn, the non-meditators flipped into an anticipatory cycle. When's it coming back? How bad will it be? Maybe it'll be even worse. So whatever was freaked out in their brain remained freaked out. Whereas the meditators had that response. Pain was withdrawn. They had repose. They had rest. They had relief. So that's a different experience. And I think some people feel bad. They blame themselves because the pain doesn't disappear, or the pain's not the same as pleasure. It hurts. You know, it's hard. And it doesn't have to be pain plus. And that's very much in our capacity to work with. So. Oh.
Hello.
Hello. You broke into a new neighborhood.
Yes, I thought I'd get in this part of town. Without getting political, but I wanted to touch back when you were talking about adversity. And I was thinking about the civil rights comment you made. And I recently saw an incredible documentary, 13th, by Ava DuVernay. And there was the comment made that the African Americans had been so afraid of being arrested. And during the civil rights movement, they stood there and allowed themselves to be arrested. And it took the power out of that situation. And the point being is that, you know, in the moment and in the situation, we don't know the value of it often until, you know, longer perspective. So I'm not expert at it, but, you know, I try to practice equanimity, and I have some practices that value the difficult experiences because of the gifts that they give me and the places they take me. And I guess when you were saying that, I said, you know, now is a great opportunity to practice because of the adversity around us. And, you know, looking at the longer picture, not really knowing where we'll see ourselves or the opinions of things later. And, you know, just holding our center while these things are going on around us. So I try to, you know, it's not easy, but when you say make friends with the negative emotions is for me to see, I say good goods and good bads, and that there's gifts in it all. And if I can stay with it, I can see what it's trying to reveal to me.
Thank you. Maybe tomorrow also we'll talk more about equanimity when we talk about compassion, because it figures very largely in there. And I think, you know, I mean, you articulated that very beautifully. For a lot of people, it wouldn't, their practice might not go to the extent of seeing the gift, but it's sort of more like what I was just describing. It's like something's really hurt, and I don't need to have it hurt worse. And thereby, I was thinking of that because I have a book coming out, June 6th, and I was very late turning in the book, and I finally turned in the book, and when it's a whole long story, which I'm sure I'll get into in various ways, but I turned in the book, my final deadline was August 1st, and I was in Europe about to sit a retreat with a Tibetan teacher of mine. I turned it in the evening of July 31st. So I always say I was like 2 years late and a day early. But I finally turned it in, and I got an away message from my publisher. I was on vacation. And when I finally heard from him, he really liked the book. And his favorite line in the book was something I didn't write. It was a quote from somebody else. And I thought, well, that's honest, you know? And it's kind of one of my favorite lines, too. It's from Roshi John Halifax, who's a friend, and who works a lot in realms of, you know, tremendous pain and suffering and loss and so on. And she said, you know, basically it may not be possible or even that useful for some to try to see the traumas they've been through as gifts. It's much more available to see them as givens. This happened. You know, now can I create and recreate a life? So I just thought that was very funny that his favorite line in the whole book I didn't even write. But I did compile it. I brought it into the context, you know. You know, so not to have too much expectation of ourselves. It's always very difficult with these qualities. Knowing what the words mean. What does equanimity mean, for example? What does it not mean? Because it sounds like another one of those words that might mean coldness or not caring, but it certainly doesn't mean that. And to understand always kind of the integrity of our experience, and also the capacity we have not to be stuck. You know, we might have a very reasonable reaction to something, but it doesn't mean we have to be stuck there. Or that it has to take over our world or define us forevermore. So, okay, I think we're gonna stop because we're really somewhere. There you are. Thank you.